I was looking at some polling data from Reuters this morning, July 2024, and there's this one thing that just jumps off the page. I just couldn't get past it.
Yeah.
You see this whole field of Democrats, right? And they're all, struggling, basically sitting within the margin of error against Donald Trump. And then right at the top, just floating there, leading 50% to 39%, is a name that isn't even running.
It's the break glass in case of emergency candidate that never actually shows up.
Exactly. We're talking about Michelle Obama. But here's the thing we really need to figure out today, and this is, I think, the mission of this deep dive. How did someone who has said explicitly, repeatedly, that she hates politics
He hates it.
become, arguably, the single most potent political figure in the entire country?
It's a total paradox, isn't it? I mean, if you look at the Gallup polls from, 2018 to 2020, she wasn't just the most admired woman among Democrats.
No.
She was the most admired woman in the United States, period. For 3 years straight, she beat Oprah, she beat the Queen of England, and she did all of it while saying, and I'm quoting here, "I have no intention of running for office ever."
Ever. That's a pretty final word.
It is. She sees politics as this messy, toxic game that's just not for her. But to really get your head around how she pulled this off, especially when you remember how brutal the media was to her at the start, we can't just look at the White House years.
No, you have to go further back.
Way further. The sources really suggest we have to go back to Michelle LaVaughn Robinson.
That name is important. LaVaughn Robinson. Because before all the magazine covers, before the best-selling books, she was a working-class kid from the south side of Chicago. And she was navigating a very specific and very heavy piece of American history. So let's start there.
Yeah.
The south side. 7436 South Euclid Avenue.
Right. This is the foundation. And I think people sometimes romanticize that South Side story, but we need to look at the sort of the mechanics of that home. On the surface, it was incredibly conventional.
Looked normal from the outside.
Totally. You have her mother, Marion, who was a stay-at-home mom until Michelle was in high school. And then you have her father, Fraser Robinson III, working shifts at the city water plant.
But it wasn't all sunshine, right? There was a shadow in that house.
No, and this is really crucial to understanding her psychology. Her father, Fraser, he suffered from multiple sclerosis. Michelle once called him the hole in my heart.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a Democratic precinct captain, very engaged in the community, but she had to watch his body just decline year after year. Watching a parent deal with that, seeing him push through the pain to go to work every day, that gives you a profound sense of urgency.
It's not just do your homework.
No, it's do not waste a single second.
And she was a striver from the jump. I mean, the notes here say she skipped second grade entirely.
She was academically aggressive, yeah. But the detail that always gets me is the commute she made to high school. She tested into this school called Whitney Young High School.
Which is a big deal.
A huge deal. It was Chicago's first magnet high school, so it was prestigious, it was integrated, it was tough. But to get there from where she lived...
How long are we talking?
We're talking 3 hours.
Round trip.
Every day, as a teenager.
Every single day. Just try to picture that. You're waking up when it's still dark out, getting on 2 different buses, maybe a train, crossing these invisible but very real lines of segregation in Chicago, all just for a better education.
That is a level of dedication that is just hard to imagine.
It is, and she did all that while being on the honor roll for 4 straight years, taking AP classes. She was the student council treasurer, and she was already dealing with, people asking her what her older brother Craig, who was a basketball star, thought about things, instead of asking her for her own opinion.
That gendered dismissal, it started early.
It started very early,
Yeah.
but she just used it all as fuel. Now, you said earlier that her story is like a microcosm of American history. I think we really need to dig into that, especially around the name Robinson, because when I was reading the genealogy in our sources, I had to stop and just reread it. Usually for African-American ancestry in the U.S., there's this brick wall around 1870, right?
That's right, the 1870 wall. It's because before the 1870 census, enslaved people weren't listed by name. They were just, tally marks, age and gender in property schedules. So tracing your family back is incredibly difficult.
But her family tree is different.
It's different because of where they came from.
The Low Country.
The South Carolina Low Country, exactly. Her father's ancestors were from the Gullah people. And for anyone listening who might not know, the Gullah is unique because they were so isolated. They lived on these coastal islands, these rice plantations where malaria was everywhere, so the white landowners often stayed away.
So that isolation let them hold on to their heritage.
It let them hold on to a massive amount of their African cultural heritage. The language, the food, the crafts things that were systematically stripped from other enslaved communities.
So she has this direct, unbroken link to an African culture that so many other Black Americans had severed.
She does. Her great-great-grandfather, a man named Jim Robinson, he was born into slavery there in 1850. He wasn't a free man until he was 15 years old. But the story that really, it just shakes you, and the one that truly defines the American contradiction, that's on her mother's side.
This is the story of Melvinia.
Melvinia Dorsey Shields, Michelle's great-great-great-grandmother. She was enslaved in South Carolina, and then she was sold to a man in Georgia. And around 1860, Melvinia had a biracial son. His name was Adolphus. For generations, the family they didn't talk about who the father was.
A protective silence.
It was a survival silence that hung over the whole family tree. But then, in 2012, researchers used modern DNA analysis, and they concluded that Adolphus's father was almost certainly a man named Charles Marion Shields.
Charles Marion Shields was.
He was the son of the man who enslaved Melvinia.
Oh my God. So let's just trace that line because it's staggering.
Yeah.
You have a woman, Melvinia, who is legally property. She has a son by the master's son. That boy, Adolphus, becomes a free man after the Civil War. His descendants moved north to Chicago in the Great Migration. They work in water plants. They become secretaries. And just 4 generations later, Melvinia's great-great-great-granddaughter moves into the White House as the First Lady of the United States.
It's almost too big to get your head around. It's the entire story of American trauma and American progress, all in a single bloodline. And Michelle has talked about this, about waking up in a house that was built by enslaved people while she herself carries the DNA of both the enslaved and the enslaver.
But it gives you perspective on this country that is just fundamentally different.
Fundamentally.
And so she carries that history, all of it, from the south side of Chicago to the Ivy League, Princeton University in 1981. And this was not an easy transition.
Not at all. It was a massive culture shock. She goes from this predominantly Black working class world to an elite, overwhelmingly white institution. She says she felt completely overwhelmed her first year.
Her parents hadn't graduated from college.
Neither of them. So she didn't know the social rules, the codes, and she wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. There's that story about her freshman year roommate that just makes you cringe.
What happened?
Well, the mother of her white roommate apparently called the university. She tried to get her daughter reassigned.
Why?
Simply because Michelle was Black. She didn't want her daughter sharing a room with a Black woman.
In 1981.
In 1981. So Michelle said she felt like a visitor on campus. She was just stunned by classmates driving around in BMWs. She said she didn't even know parents who drove BMWs. But she didn't back down from that feeling. She actually leaned into it. She studied it.
Through her thesis, right?
Exactly. Her senior sociology thesis is something academics still talk about. It was called Princeton Educated Blacks and the Black Community.
So she was basically researching her own identity crisis.
100%. She wasn't just writing a paper. She was trying to solve herself. She sent out this huge survey to Black alumni, asking them if they still identified with the Black community after going to a place like Princeton. She was terrified of becoming a sellout.
And what did she find out?
Well, her own data was a little disheartening for her at the time. It suggested that the longer these alumni were in that elite corporate world, the less connected they felt to the struggles of the working-class Black community. It was her biggest fear, confirmed by her own research.
So that question, am I selling out? I don't know. It followed her from Princeton to Harvard Law School.
It did, but when she got to Harvard in '88, something shifted. She found a key mentor, a legendary law professor named Charles Ogletree. And he really helped her resolve that internal conflict.
How so?
He helped her come to the conclusion that she could be, and this is her phrase, both brilliant and Black. She realized it wasn't a choice. She didn't have to give up one to have the other. And you see her start to act on that. She joined demonstrations to get the university to hire more minority professors. She worked for the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, helping low-income tenants. She was finding her voice.
Which brings us to the moment that really changes everything. She's a young associate at Sidley Austin, a big, powerful law firm in Chicago. She's doing marketing, intellectual property law, and she gets assigned a summer associate to mentor.
A guy with a funny name, Barack Obama.
And I love this part of the story because it's usually told with him as the main character. But in this version of the story, She was the one with the power. She was his mentor.
She was his boss, and she was so skeptical of him at first. She'd heard all this hype from the partners about this brilliant kid from Harvard, but she just figured, okay, he's probably just some smooth talker.
She tried to keep it professional.
Totally. She even tried to set him up on dates with her friends because she was like, I am not dating the summer intern.
But that opposites attract thing was real.
Oh, it was undeniable. Think about it. She came from this super stable two-parent dinner on the table at 6 p.m. home. He was adventurous, multicultural, grew up in Hawaii and Indonesia. Father was absent. He was the wanderer and she was the anchor.
Their first date was to see Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which, when you think about it, that's a pretty intense first date movie.
It is, but it's also kind of perfect for them. It's all about race and community and tension, all the things they were living and breathing. But even as their relationship got serious, Michelle was going through this other crisis, a professional one. She was realizing that corporate law, helping big companies protect their trademarks, it just wasn't doing it for her.
This is the pivot. This is when she leaves the big corporate salary behind for the public sector.
And we can't understate what a huge decision this was. She still had law school loans to pay off, but she took a massive pay cut to work as an assistant to the mayor of Chicago. And then she became the executive director for the Chicago office of a nonprofit called Public Allies.
And she loved it.
She said she had never been happier than when she was building that organization. She was finding and training young people to work on social issues in their communities. It just clicked with her values in a way that intellectual property law never could.
Okay, so she works for the mayor. She runs Public Allies. Later, she's an executive at the University of Chicago hospitals. But I want to pause on one job she had because it kind of gets glossed over in the official story.
You're talking about the corporate board.
I am. She was on the board of directors for a company called Treehouse Foods. And for our listeners, this isn't just some local bakery.
No. Treehouse was a massive food processing company, a major supplier for Walmart.
And this is where it gets complicated.
This is where the personal ambition crashes right into political reality. Michelle is earning a very significant income from this board seat, 6 figures, money the family needed. But at the same time, it's 2007, and her husband is getting ready to run for president.
And his platform isn't exactly pro-corporate giant.
Far from it. He goes to this big AFL-CIO forum, a huge union event, and he just blasts Walmart for their labor practices. He calls them out by name as a negative force in the American economy.
So hold on, you've got the husband on stage trashing the very company that is essentially signing his wife's paychecks.
That's it, exactly. It was a PR disaster just waiting to happen. And it shows you just how incredibly hard it is to be a political spouse and also have your own high-level career. Can you really have an independent professional identity?
Apparently not. The sources say she cut ties with that board very quickly after that speech.
She had to. It was, I think, a really pivotal moment for her. It was the moment she must have realized, okay, I can't have my own separate corporate identity anymore. From now on, everything I do is going to be seen through the lens of his campaign.
It's the death of Michelle, the private citizen.
And the birth of Michelle, the political asset. And she was not happy about it. She was famously reluctant about him running for president in the first place.
I read that she only agreed to it on one condition.
The deal was he had to quit smoking.
Serious.
That was the deal. She hated the media scrutiny, she hated what politics does to families, and she hated that he smoked, so she leveraged one against the other. You want to be president? Fine. Quit the cigarettes.
A deal's a deal. But once she was on board, she was all in. But that media treatment of her in 07 and 08, I mean, brutal, feels like an understatement.
It was a coordinated campaign, and we have to be clear about the specific tropes they used. There was a narrative built, largely by conservative commentators like Cal Thomas on Fox News, that she was the angry black woman.
They took her candor, her directness, the fact that she wasn't just a smiling, silent spouse, and they twisted it into something negative.
They weaponized it. Do you remember the terrorist fist jab comment?
Oh, I remember it vividly.
Edie Hill on Fox News, she sees a video of Michelle and Barack bumping fists on stage, just a sweet, normal gesture between a couple, and she calls it a terrorist fist jab.
It seems so absurd looking back on it.
It's absurd, but at the time, it was part of a very deliberate pattern. They were trying to paint them as other, as hostile, un-American, maybe even dangerous. And then she made that gaffe when she said, "For the first time in my adult life, I am proud of my country."
The context was that she was proud of the high voter engagement, the feeling of hope, but the soundbite, The soundbite was just brutal.
It was red meat for her critics. They
Yeah.
immediately painted her as unpatriotic. So the campaign knew they had a problem. They had to pivot. They had to execute a complete rebrand of Michelle Obama.
So how did they do it? You can't just flip a switch on public perception.
No, it was very strategic. They softened her image deliberately. She went on daytime talk shows like The View. She did a cover story for Ladies' Home Journal. You saw her fashion change. She started wearing lighter colors, more cardigans. She was seen shopping at J. Crew.
They made her more relatable.
They shifted her entire messaging to use motherhood as a framework. She wasn't the sharp corporate lawyer anymore or the community activist. She was the mom in chief.
And did it work?
It worked incredibly well. By the 2012 election, her approval ratings were consistently over 60%. That was significantly higher than her husband's. One senior campaign official in the sources called her the most popular political figure in America. She became a huge asset, especially with working mothers, because she could connect with them in a way that her husband, with his more, professorial style, sometimes couldn't.
So they win the election. It's January 2009. She is now the First Lady of the United States, the first African-American First Lady. She has to define this role for herself in a way that nobody in history ever had to.
And you have to understand, that role is historically a trap. It's a gilded cage. If you do too much, you're seen as overstepping. Think about Hillary Clinton and healthcare reform in the 90s.
And if you do too little, you're just seen as a decoration.
Exactly. So Michelle chose to focus on a few key initiatives. Let's move. Joining forces, reach higher, and let girls learn.
Let's start with Let's Move. The campaign against childhood obesity. On the surface, that seems like the safest topic in the world. Who's going to argue against healthy kids?
You would think so. But you would be very, very wrong. This immediately became a lightning rod for the whole big government debate. The symbolic part was great. She planted the White House kitchen garden, the first one since Eleanor Roosevelt. But the minute her initiative started influencing federal school lunch standards, the pushback was fierce.
I remember Sarah Palin and others making a point of bringing cookies and sweets to school events as a form of protest.
Yes. Republicans like Chris Christie, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, they all framed it as the nanny state run amok. Cruz joked he'd bring French fries back to school cafeterias. Her trying to get kids to eat more vegetables was portrayed as government overreach.
But she stuck with it.
She did. She framed it as a public health crisis and even a national security issue, citing Pentagon data about how many young people were too obese to qualify for military service.
Okay, so then there was joining forces.
That was her initiative with Dr. Joe Biden to support military families. And what's really notable about that one is, after Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, she made a specific point to include gay service members and their families in that work. It was a quiet but really powerful way to signal inclusion.
We also have to talk about her style. Because you mentioned the rebrand, but as First Lady, she turned it into an art form. She became a fashion populist.
That is the perfect term for it. She was the master of the high-low mix. One day she'd wear a gown by a high-end designer like Jason Wu, but the next she'd be in a cardigan from J. Crew or a dress from Target.
Which made her seem so accessible, it sent a message. I may live in the White House, but I still shop where you shop.
It did. And it was incredibly powerful economically. There was a study that found her wearing an outfit from a specific brand was worth an average of $14 million in value to that company.
$14 million.
$14 million. She wasn't just wearing clothes. She was moving entire markets. She really managed to channel the aspirational style of a Jackie Kennedy, but with the sort of discipline relatability of a Barbara Bush.
But not everyone was a fan of this mom-in-chief, gardener, fashion icon version of Michelle Obama. She got criticism from the left, too.
Yeah.
And this is a really important point to unpack because it really divided the feminist community.
That's right. In 2013, a writer named Michelle Cottle wrote a piece for Politico with a headline that called Michelle Obama a feminist nightmare.
Feminist nightmare. That's an incredibly harsh thing to say. What was the argument? I mean, she's a Harvard-educated lawyer. She was a hospital executive. How was that a nightmare?
The argument was all about the use of her platform and her power. Cottle's point was that Michelle Obama had more intellectual firepower, more real-world executive experience than almost any first lady since Hillary Clinton. But instead of using that power to champion something like, say, equal pay legislation or criminal justice reform, she was planting carrots.
Oof. When you put it that way, it sounds so reductive.
It was a sharp critique. Cottle basically argued that Michelle had retreated into this very traditional, almost retro domestic role, tending the garden, focusing on the kids. She said it was a waste of a Harvard law degree and a potential step backwards for powerful women.
Okay, but hold on. I have to push back hard on that. Isn't that argument completely ignoring the racial component we talked about earlier?
100%. And that was the immediate defense from her supporters. You have to remember the history here. Hillary Clinton, a white woman, tried to take the lead on a major policy issue, healthcare reform, and she was absolutely crucified for overstepping her bounds.
Right. So if Michelle Obama, who was already dealing with the angry black woman stereotype, had come out of the gate swinging on some controversial legislation, the backlash would have been nuclear.
It would have been unimaginable. She simply did not have the political luxury of being a radical. She had to be unassailable. And what's more unassailable than healthy kids and supporting military families? She chose to use soft power because she knew hard power would have made her a massive target and probably damaged her husband's entire presidency.
So the gardening wasn't a retreat from the fight. It was a shield.
It was a strategic fortress. And from within that fortress, you could argue she achieved more cultural change than she ever could have with a piece of legislation.
So she makes it through 8 years in the White House. She leaves with incredibly high approval ratings. And then we enter the post-White House era. And honestly, this might be her most powerful and commercially successful period yet.
Oh, without a doubt. She flawlessly pivoted from political figure to full-blown media mogul. Her memoir, Becoming, was a phenomenon. It sold 11.5 million copies.
11.5 million. That number is just staggering.
It's one of the best-selling memoirs of all time. And then she followed it up with The Light We Carry. But she didn't just write books, she started producing content. She and Barack signed a massive deal with Netflix. Their company, Higher Ground Productions, put out documentaries like American Factory.
Which won an Oscar.
Which won an Academy Award, yep. And the documentaries Becoming and Crip Camp.
And she won a Grammy.
She won 2 Grammys. For Best Spoken Word Album, for the audiobooks of both of her memoirs. I mean, she's halfway to an Edo.
But even as she's building this whole media empire, she has not stayed quiet on politics. Not at all.
No, and her tone is much sharper now. She's free from the constraints of being the First Lady. She became a very powerful and vocal critic of Donald Trump. In 2016, after the Access Hollywood tape was released, she gave a speech in New Hampshire that many people still say was the single most powerful speech of that entire election.
She said his comments had shook me to my core. It wasn't really a political speech. It felt more like a moral one.
It was exactly that. And she's continued. She endorsed Hillary Clinton, then Joe Biden. She started the When We All Vote initiative to boost voter turnout. But there's always this persistent whisper, this sort of fantasy among some Democrats that one day she'll finally agree to run for office herself.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that what-if scenario. That Reuters Ipsos poll from July 2024 showing her beating Trump 50% to 39%. I mean, in modern American politics, that's a landslide. But every single time the idea comes up, she just shuts it down completely.
Every time.
So why do you think that is? Why would you leave that much power just sitting on the table?
I think at the end of the day, she saw up close for 8 years what the presidency does to a person and to a family. And she has now achieved a level of global influence that doesn't require the misery of campaigning or the gridlock of Washington, D.C. She has immense cultural influence, which in a lot of ways is more flexible and maybe more enduring than political office.
She can shape the culture without having to negotiate a budget. So let's try to sum this all up. We have the girl from the south side of Chicago, the descendant of enslaved people, who navigates the Ivy League, mentors a future president, completely redefines the role of First Lady, and then becomes this global media icon.
And she did all of it while navigating this specific minefield of racial and gendered attacks that no First Lady before her ever had to face. She took the angry black woman stereotype they tried to stick her with and dismantled it by literally becoming the most admired woman in the world. She took the elitist charge and countered it by shopping at Target and planting a vegetable garden. It was a masterclass in using soft power.
It really was. And here's the final thought I want to leave you with today. We spend so much time obsessing over political power, who holds the office, who signs the bills. But Michelle Obama has managed to transition from someone who was actively reluctant to enter public life into one of its most powerful figures without ever holding elected office herself.
And that raises a really fascinating question for our modern era. If she continues to refuse to run for office, how does her influence evolve from here? Is cultural influence, the power you get from books and Netflix shows and podcasts, is that ultimately more powerful or at least more effective than political office when it comes to actually changing hearts and minds?
That is the big question. And I want to ask you, the listener, which version of Michelle Obama resonates most with you? Is it the lawyer, the mother, the advocate, or the media producer? And do you think she's right to stay out of the political ring?
It's definitely something to think about.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll catch you on the next one.